when it comes to women in Islam, they don't have the promise of 70 virgins in the world to come and all these delights. And you could argue that with polygamy and things like that, and having so many children, that they don't have the rights. Saudi Arabia only recently even opened to women, say, driving or voting. What keeps so many women, hundreds of millions of women, within Islam?
Well, if it's someone who wants to get out of Islam, I would say fear, especially if she's in a Muslim country. I mean, the penalty for leaving Islam is death.
How many countries roughly would that apply to today?
Where there would be a death penalty, or
Yeah,
you just have
death
a
penalty for
Muslim
conversion from Islam.
there aren't a lot of countries that have an official death penalty anymore. But what they'll do is they'll sort of water down the penalties. Like in Pakistan, you'll be sentenced to death for blasphemy or something like that. But they just usually don't enforce it. They'll usually just keep you in prison for a really long time. In lots of other countries, they won't just execute you for doing something like that. They've traded out for prison sentences and things like that.
You basically lose everything.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. The idea is, so the official penalty for apostasy is death. A woman nowadays, she might be worried that she'll be thrown in prison now for being an unbeliever or something like that. Her greater concern would be what her family's going to do, what her husband's going to do, something like that. And it's just going to be very, very bad. I mean, you can on the shows with like Rashid and or the shows Sam Shamoon and I used to do, you get calls. You get calls from women who recognize that Islam is false and they want to believe in the gospel and are just absolutely weeping and terrified of what will happen to them. There's a young woman out in California. She doesn't want to ever share her story publicly, but she converted to Christianity in a Muslim country, and her parents turned the handling of the issue over to her uncle. Her uncle showed up with a bunch of grown men, and they all gang raped her and said, "We're going to keep doing this until you decide that you don't want to be treated like we would treat a Christian." And so these are there's just massive social pressure, but it's like it reminds me of like what I mentioned to you earlier about living in the Bronx. Human beings can get used to anything.
Yes.
So I didn't realize.
You're raised in it. That's all you know.
I didn't realize until I left the Bronx how much horrible stuff I was putting up with in the Bronx that I just gotten used to until I go somewhere else and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Not being there where I lived in the Bronx. And so I think it's like that. I mean, if you grow up in an environment where it's completely normal for men to beat women, you don't think a lot of it, right?
Women don't have the same promises, heavenly promises that the men do.
Definitely not. Yeah. They get some, they get a place to live and things like that. But it's really,
food, right?
Yeah, it's actually really disturbing. And if you ever, are sitting down with a Muslim woman and you are talking to her, about Islam, if you can kind of gently get to, your husband, you're still his wife in paradise, but he also gets all of these houris, these specially designed sex slaves.
Perpetual virgins, right?
They're perpetual virgins. You have sex with them and then Allah restores their virginity. And how does that feel, knowing that as a Muslim, your belief is that for all eternity, you will be sort of competing for your husband's attention with all of these specially designed sex machines? I mean, don't you think that God could come up with something better than that for you? And so, good way to spring off.
Unless that God was the creation of a man's mind, very sexually.
Yeah, if it's a creation of a man's mind, makes perfect sense now.